I'm sure this has happened to you many times. Someone plays the Scandinavian defense against you. You know it's not the best defense in the world, but you don't know how to punish it properly. Well, in this video, I'm going to carefully show you several different ways to effectively punish this particular defense right here, which is known as the Scandinavian defense, but using a few clever and interesting opening traps that I'm absolutely sure many of your opponents will very likely fall for during their games. So let's get started. The first thing you need to know is that whenever someone plays the Scandinavian defense against you, you should always capture this pawn. Why? Because when you capture this pawn, what you're doing is bringing the queen to the center of the board. You're basically performing an attraction exercise. And once the queen is in the center of the board, you can attack her and gain time in your development, all right? You've just developed a knight, and on top of that, you're attacking a queen that has to move. And when she does, you'll have gained a tempo because you can keep developing. All right, a very, very typical move, maybe the most typical of all, when we attack this queen, is that they place her here on a5. This is probably the most common move you'll see in most of your games. How are we going to continue? Well, we're simply going to continue with the move d4. We place a pawn in the center. We allow both of our bishops to develop. And this is perfect. If they don't fall for the trap I'm about to show you, it's absolutely fine, because your position will still be much better than your opponent's. They haven't developed their pieces, this bishop can't get out, and this queen is here in the center of the board, which will be easy to attack later on. Also, you already know that we control the center and your opponent won't be able to, because to control the center, they would have to play e5, and when they do, we can capture that pawn. So they have to keep developing your pieces, for example with knight to f6. We're going to do exactly the same thing here, knight to f3, and with this move we develop our pieces really well and efficiently. Now this very first trap is specifically for all those players who like to play this nasty bishop pin against you. I run into this a lot, especially with players who don't have 2000 elo, but less. The bishop pin with bishop to g4 might seem really good because it's immobilizing this bishop, pinning it to the queen. But if you know how to take advantage of it, it's actually really good for us. Here we're going to start with the move h3. All right, so what happens with the move h3? If your opponent retreats, great, we've made them wasted tempo at the bishop. But here I often see a move where people think they're being really clever, but it's not going to help them at all, which is this one right here. It's called the double pin. They pin our knight with two pieces, and not only that, but they also pin this pawn, so we can't move the knight, because if we do, we lose the queen. And we can't capture the bishop, because if we do, we lose the rook. And here, a lot of you would already be throwing your hands up in the air and saying, oh my gosh, how on earth am I supposed to get out of this situation? Well, don't worry at all, because the very first opening trap is actually to capture this bishop right here. That's right, we're giving away the rook. How can it be, chess teacher, that you're giving away the rook? Don't worry, because I have a plan in mind. Capturing the rook in this position is basically the same as completely losing the game, because that powerful queen after the move knight to e2, a truly fantastic move, exclamation mark, has absolutely nowhere left to go. This square is covered by the knight, this one by the pawn, this one by the knight, this one by the pawn, and this one by the bishop on c1. Therefore, here, no matter what the black pieces do, our next move will be knight to g3, threatening a queen that won't have any squares to escape to. For example, the most common thing is that they capture this pawn, and now simply knight to g3 wins the game because this queen can't go anywhere. Maybe the best move for white would be, for black, it would be to capture this bishop and now recapture it with the king, so that we end up with a queen advantage, and with a bit of technique, we'll very likely win the game very easily. What? Did you find this first one fun? Well, hold on, because this isn't the best part. Now the good stuff begins. I love this trap. When someone plays the Scandinavian defense against you, the first thing you need to remember is that you should always capture this pawn. And the second thing is that this queen is in the center. We're going to chase her away while developing our knight to c3 and gaining a tempo. The most popular move is this one here, queen to a5, and we're going to continue with d4. As you can see, we're always going to do the same thing, so it's very simple. We've already seen what happens if they develop this knight to f6. Now let's see what happens if they develop the knight to c6. Alright, playing knight to c6 usually seems like a very bad idea, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, this queen gets a bit trapped and can't go back, since a typical move in the Scandinavian is to play c6 so that the queen can return whenever she wants. So knight to c6 is usually not a very good idea, but here we have an extremely good move, which is d5. A lot of people don't dare to play d5 because black has some very strong attacks. For example, knight to b4 along with bishop to f5, and now they'd attack us at this point with two pieces, which is hard to defend. They'd check us, they'd take our rook. Right? That's why a lot of people are afraid to play d5 here, and they're also scared. Why? Because now playing a 3 seems pointless. It's true that the knight is being threatened, but the knight doesn't actually need to move. Again, for the same reason as before, the queen is pinning the rook. You see it, right? Very good. So here we are going to play a 3. Even though it might seem like a waste of time, don't worry, because it's actually a very good move, and I'm going to explain right now why, and your opponents won't understand it. They're going to say, well, right now you're not threatening anything. So I'm going to continue with my plan, bishop to f5, and put extremely strong pressure on this pawn here. What happens, my friends, is that we're going to win the game. You heard me right. It's that easy. What's the key? That lines are opening up for the king. And on top of that, we have a strong pawn controlling the c6 square. That's why here the winning move is the following. Bishop to b5, check. Alright, let's set up the following situation. Here, it's true that black could move the king, but that looks pretty devastating, just like if they try to retreat their bishop to d7. First, because they're abandoning their attack plan, and second, because after bishop takes and king takes, once again this king is left in the center of the board, and probably not in very good shape, since we could bring in the queen and all that. So here, the only logical response after bishop to b5 check is c6. And suddenly, this seems like a very good defense for black, because no matter how much we capture, our opponents could recapture, and this pawn would be well defended by the knight, so they would be threatening the bishop. However, here you simply need to do the following. Pay close attention to this important moment. Pawn takes knight, double exclamation mark. What a move. We have just won a knight, so the only way black can realistically try to survive this position is to accept the challenge and capture our rook. At the moment, we're down in material since we've given up the exchange. So what exactly is the exchange, and why does it matter here? A rook for a minor piece, whether it's a knight or a bishop. In this particular case, it was the knight. But we're going to keep up our attack and ultimately win the game after the move d takes c6, since at this point our opponents should pretty much resign and accept defeat. And I'll explain why. We're threatening a terrifyingly strong discovered attack because, watch out, after the pawn push, pawn takes pawn would be checkmate thanks to our queen. That is, if black now tries something like knight to f6, which doesn't really make sense, we could simply deliver an almost checkmate with this pawn, or if not, capture this pawn with check, or if not, take the rook and promote to another queen. Therefore, here the only option that seems to offer any hope is to bring the rook to the same file as the queen, while threatening it. And also, if we advance, they could bring in the bishop. But here we win the game effectively with the pawn advance, discovered check, c7 check. What should they do? Logically, they only have one move. They have to try to bring the bishop back, because if they place the rook, we would promote to a queen with checkmate. And when they bring the bishop back, we promote to a queen, capturing the rook with check. And when the king captures, simply queen takes d7 would be checkmate. You're going to love this trap because we're going to use it when someone plays the Scandinavian defense against you. Yes, but instead of recapturing this pawn right away, they play knight to f6. This is called the Stamford Gambit. A lot of people play this gambit, and nowadays even more so. What's its purpose? To recapture this pawn, that's right, but not with the queen, with the knight. Why? So they don't expose their queen to early attacks from the knight. It makes a lot of sense, but today we're going to punish it in a very decisive way. We're going to let them capture the pawn with the knight or the queen, whichever they prefer. Logically, if they've played the Stamford Gambit, it's because they want to recapture with the knight. If they recapture with the queen, we would simply be in the same position after knight to c6 as in the first trap. You see that, right? So normally they'll recapture with the knight. By the way, if you want more traps like these, but in another opening, Let me know in the comments and give this video a big like, because that way I'll bring you more traps. I'm gonna do some research and then bring them to the channel for you. How are we gonna continue? All right, we take advantage of the fact that our opponent has a very weak center, since they don't have any pawns, just a piece. So we can use our pawns to exploit it. We attack the knight, which has to move. Important. We have a strong pawn center, and our opponent doesn't have any pawns fighting for the center. That's not a good idea because they have no control over the position. We're going to continue with the move knight to f3. As you can see here, what exactly are we doing? We are developing our pieces. This is a move that I see all the time, and I absolutely love it when people play this move against me. The bishop pin. I'm sure you guys get this played against you in almost every game too, but don't worry. You should actually be happy when it happens because it's very easy to punish. Now we're going to keep up the initiative. Don't even think about playing bishop to e2 to try to get rid of the pin. Absolutely not. Careful, it's true that right now they're threatening the following. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and then no one is defending this pawn. So it would be queen takes d4, losing a pawn, and a central pawn at that, which is very important. But we're going to keep up with some serious activity and initiative to crush our opponent. First, c5, threatening this knight. And many of you might say, come on, chess teacher, you're threatening the knight, but you're letting it return to its strong position in the center, and now no pawn can chase it away. That's true, but we have an attack plan that's just too good. Our opponent is placing their pieces incorrectly, all right? They're placing their pieces in the center of the board without defending properly. And here we're going to counterattack in a very strong way. Key move, queen to b3. A very good move. What does queen to b3 do? First, it gets out of the pin. Second, it keeps defending the knight, so if they capture it, we can simply recapture with the queen. Third, it puts pressure on the central knight. And fourth, and most importantly, we're attacking the pawn on b7. This is the most important thing of all, because everything else is defended, but this pawn is not defended. Are there sad ways to defend it, like queen to c8, or even sadder, bishop to c8? Yes, queen to c8 would not be possible because we would capture the knight. Bishop to c8 would be the saddest move in the world because we would gain way too much in development. We would continue with bishop to c4, and then could even come in almost giving checkmate with bishop takes f7. That's why here the most common move is to defend this pawn with b6. And this is a mistake. Why is it a mistake? Because when you put all the pawns on dark squares, what happens to the light squares? They start to become very weak, and we can take advantage of them in a brutal way. Basically, we've won the game because we understood the position and our opponent didn't. Alright, now what we want to do here is to come in and give a check with the bishop so that we can really exploit all of those weak light squares on the board. But if we do it now, it wouldn't really make much sense either. First, we need to add an important in-between move, which will absolutely guarantee us the win in this situation. And this move is the following: knight to e5. First, we attack the bishop, and second, we put a lot of pressure on the weak squares. If at any point they try to defend the bishop with the knight, be careful, because the queen and the knight are both targeting the spot, and we could end up delivering a devastating checkmate. But of course, in this particular situation, the opponents will definitely notice that. So instead of moving the knight, they'll actually move the bishop that's currently being attacked, and they'll most likely place it on this diagonal right here, which is extremely dangerous for them, so that they also threaten us with a discovered attack on our queen. Alright, now we're finally ready to win the game. We go in with the bishop to b4, check. This is a very good move because now we're putting even more pressure on the weak squares, and at this point there's simply no way for them to defend themselves effectively. There's no satisfactory way to defend. So what are we gonna do? First, if they defend with the bishop, we could even capture this knight, and then threaten checkmate. Therefore, they can't defend with the bishop. They have to try, for example, the move c6. Even so, they're lost, because all we have to do is bishop takes c6. We have too many pieces attacking the weak squares. Knight takes c6, and now bishop takes c6, check. And we're going to take the rook. But not only that, we're not just going to take the rook. Let me explain. We're getting check. How do they block the check? There are only two ways: giving up the queen, which obviously they're not going to do, or bishop to d7, which is logically the move they'll make. But now we continue not with bishop takes rook, but with bishop takes knight, bishop takes d5. Extremely good move. We're still threatening the rook, and now we have an extra knight. A rook they can't even try to save because we deliver a devastating checkmate with the bishop, thanks to the bishop and queen battery and the king being trapped. So here they should stop the checkmate. And now we could capture the rook. And as you can see, if we count the material, we have the queen, right, yes, but we also have a full rook advantage and even a pawn as well. A rook and a pawn, a completely clear and decisive advantage to win the game. This is one of my favorite traps against the Scandinavian defense. When we capture and threaten the queen, a lot of people say, well, I'll just move the queen back to where it started and avoid any problems. But when they do this, we have a trap available that drives me crazy. We'll play d4. All right, here they can keep developing, for example, their knight, putting pressure once with the knight on this pawn, and again with the queen on this pawn. Therefore, we have a very strong pressure that we have to defend against. For example, knight to f3. And now, suddenly, it seems like the move bishop to g4 is really an impressive move. Why? Because now it's pinning the knight, which was also defending this pawn. So we're starting to have problems. How do we defend it? If we play bishop to e2, they capture, and then they capture this pawn. So we've lost a pawn if we play bishop to e2. If we then play, for example, bishop to e3 to defend this pawn, they capture, and when we recapture, again, we lose a pawn. So, chess teacher, here it really does seem like I'm in serious trouble. How do I get rid of this ping? Well, don't worry, because once again, we're actually in a very good position. The only thing is, you don't know how to take advantage of it, but I'll show you, don't worry. d5, a spectacular move that looks really bad. It's a move I call camouflage because it seems like a terribly bad move, but it's actually an amazing one. It threatens the knight, but this knight can jump to e5, and now it looks like we're in even more trouble. They pin our knight, and on top of that, they put pressure on it with their own knight from e5. So here it really does seem like we're in trouble, but actually, we already have a completely winning move. If you want, you can try pausing the video to find it, but I'm going to tell you right now because it's incredible. Knight takes on e5. Sacrificing the queen wins the game whether they capture the queen or not. Let me explain. If they don't capture the queen, which, by the way, the best move is to capture the queen, okay? For black, that's the best move. But if, for example, they don't capture the queen and say, well, I'll play, just to say something, knight to f6, what would happen then? Well, now we would simply play knight takes on g4, and we'd be up 2 pieces. Up 2 pieces. But of course, here the best move is definitely to see what happens if they capture our queen. Because now, chess teacher, you're down a queen. So if they capture the queen, what we have to do is bring in our bishop to give check. This is starting to sound familiar, eh? We've got the white squares very well covered with our pieces. So here we've won the game. How do they block the check? The king can't move, and if they block with the queen, we'd win the queen completely for free. And even though it looks like we gave up the queen, simply by recapturing this bishop here, we're once again up 2 pieces. Do you see it? Up 2 pieces, the knight we capture here and the bishop we just took. So they can't block with the queen. What should they do? They have to play c6. There's no other way. And when they play c6, we'll simply capture the pawn and we're threatening checkmate on the next move. That is, if here, for example, they play knight f6, we could recapture this pawn with a discovered check. They would have to block. We would capture this rook, winning a queen, because we would capture and promote to a queen, and that would be a disaster. Here, the only move that seems to stop both the advance and the capture is queen to c7, but it doesn't stop anything at all. We'll simply play pawn takes c7, discovered check, and now when they block with the queen, because the king can't move, what would happen if the king tries to move here? Simply, knight takes f7 would be checkmate. The pawn covers here and the bishop covers these 2 squares. Therefore, the king can't move. They have to block with the queen. Could we capture the queen? Yes, but even better, I think, to capture this rook by promoting to a queen again. And now, this is checkmate. Why? Because we're checking the king, it can't move, and the queen can't block because it's doubly pinned by the bishop. And as a reward, if you've stayed until the end, I'll show you the trap that has let me win the most times in the Scandinavian defense. It's the trap when threatening the queen, they play queen to d6. It's also a very popular move, and in fact, I've shown you traps against all the popular moves by black. Queen to f5, queen to d8, and queen to d6, which we hadn't covered yet. We're gonna play d4, alright? As you can see, we're always gonna play something similar. In case they don't fall for the trap, we'll have a development advantage and a better position. Here, the trap comes when they play knight to c6. They're going to lose the game just for playing knight to c6. Why? Because we have a tremendous sequence of moves. Remember, whenever they play knight to c6 and the queen is on d6, knight to b5 is going to be devastating. We threaten the queen and the c7 square, winning the rook. Check, and we take the rook. So they have two moves, queen to d7 or queen to d8. It really doesn't matter to us because we're going to continue with bishop to f4. And now there's no way for them to stop the knight from coming in through c7. As you can see, there's no way to stop it now. The only option is to play e5, sacrificing the pawn, which we will gladly capture. If they capture our queen, we would simply bring in the rook, and that would be wonderful. And if not, whatever they do, what we're going to do is advance and once again put pressure on the spot here. Therefore, there's no way to defend the c7 square. And what I like most is that if after playing d4, they don't fall into the trap of playing knight to c6, because then we would win immediately, with knight to b5 and bishop to f4, it's likely they'll play, for example, knight to f6. We still have another chance for them to fall into the trap. We can play knight to f3. So it looks like we're playing the two knights. And I promise you, a lot of my opponents now play the other knight. So it seems like a normal move, but what do we know if the queen is on d6 and the knight is on c6? We have the move knight to b5 available, and even though it's not exactly the same as before because this knight is here, it's still pretty similar. Let me explain it to you. The queen has to move. It doesn't matter if it's d7 or d8 because we're going to do the same thing, okay? What do we have to do? Now, the move bishop to f4 wouldn't work because with a knight on f6, they put it on d5, threatening our bishop and defending c7. So here, we need to change the plan just a little bit. But hey, it's still simple. Remember, if they played bishop to f4 right away, and if they develop the knight first, we're going to play d5, threatening a knight that has to move. And once it does, since the pawn is on d5, now yes, bishop to f4 wins the game. Why? Because now, indeed, the knight can't come here because this is well defended. And many of you will say to me, come on, chess teacher, what do you mean the knight can't come here? What I'm seeing is that the knight can come here. Well, no, it can't actually jump here, because in this particular position, we have a truly spectacular and clever trap. And the trap is as follows. The queen takes on d5, sacrificing the queen for a knight, because now, after this exchange, we'll have the check available on c7. Check, we take the rook, and most importantly, we take the queen, winning a piece. So if they play the Scandinavian against you, they better be careful because you're well prepared with lots of traps. By the way, if you like the way I explain things and want to subscribe to the channel where I comment on games, I'll leave the link in the description. Just for those of you who feel like improving a bit more by watching the games with commentary. That's all. It's not an obligation or anything, just for those who feel like it. You have it in the description. Chess Teacher Games. I hope you loved this video. Let me know in the comments which opening you want me to show you some awesome traps for. I'll research them and record the videos. And now that's it. We'll see each other in the next video, dear friends. Goodbye.